Sabito slowly groaned in response as he opened his lavender eyes. Slowly he got up and noticed he was laying on the floor, and frowned when he saw the covers on his body. He sat up with a pounding headache, looked around, and noticed how his friends were all passed out as well. He yawned, standing up to stretch, trying to keep his balance as he started to walk, only to have his lavender eyes widened as he looked at Yin, who was fast asleep with her head laying on the dining table, her sandwich left untouched. He rubbed the back of his neck, walking past her as he headed into the bathroom instead to wash up. He was prepared to see a widespread of feminine products, only to have none of them present except for the basics. Then, why does Monaco always complain that she runs out of so many stuff that I and Giyu have to get for her? Sabito muttered to himself as he picked up his toothbrush, and he noticed how Yin's toothpaste was there as well. Shaking his head a bit, he proceeded to brush his teeth, washing up as well, for he needed to get ready for classes too. He yawned more only for himself to turn off the shower and wipe himself dry. Being so used to wearing a towel around his waist, he walked out of the bathroom and headed into the kitchen to open the fridge. Grabbing some carton of milk, he opened it and looked at Yin started to shift in her sleep. And he watched as she slowly sat up. "Good morning," he called out, and Yin mumbled a response as she rubbed her eyes a little and stretched her eyes, still closed. She slowly opened her eyes and looked towards Sabito, and she raised an eyebrow in response. "You must be confident about your body, Sabito." Yin spoke out, and Sabito's eyes widened as he realized that he was just wearing a towel around his waist. He then swallowed the lump in his throat and quickly kept the carton of milk, and Yin slowly shook her head, getting up as she went to shower instead before any of his friends woke up and started snatching the bathroom away. Sabito's face flushed red once he heard Yin's shutting the door quickly, running to her room, and, well, going back. He ran to his room to put on some clothes. Wouldn't want that happening again. He let out a sigh as he walked out of his room once more and looked at the sandwich that was still left untouched on the table. He frowned, walking towards the dining table as he poked the sandwich, only to realize that it had dried out. He soon reached the bathroom door opening, and his lavender eyes widened as Yin came out from the shower, drying her hair with her towel. Her eyes looked towards him, and she awkwardly nodded her head, and Sabito watched as she entered her room, only for him to hear his friends groaning in response as they started to wake up. "Okay, get out now. Go and prepare for class," Sabito spoke out to his friends, starting to wake up and looked around confusedly. "Huh, Sabito, since when were you so kind as to lend us covers?" Tengen asked as he yawned flamboyantly and looked towards the peach-colored hair man who had a frown on his forehead. "Whatever, just go," he muttered out as he ushered his friends out, and soon he was left alone with Yin in their apartment. He sighed as he picked up the dried-out sandwich and chucked it into the bin, whereas he went to the kitchen and started to bring out some bread and ham to make a sandwich for not himself. He heard her room door opening, and he looked up as he packed them into a Ziploc bag, and his eyes widened as he held the bag of sandwich in his hands. He noticed how she was wearing. It was a clear sign she was a design student, given how her fashion sense was top-notch, to say. The way her hair was neatly combed out through it, and soon frowned as she noticed that her hair still had some knots in it, only to let out a sigh. She then looked up at Sabito, only for her to quickly turn away and walk back into her room, and Sabito remained silent then. He then let out a sigh as he looked at the bag of the sandwich he had prepared for her, and frowned, looking towards the time. "Aren't you going to be running late?" Her voice spoke out, and he flinched and noticed how she was right next to him drinking the same bottle of soda she had bought from the previous night, only for him to grab a hold of it and keep it in the fridge. "Drink this instead," he muttered out as he took out a carton of orange juice. And Yin blinked her eyes a few times and looked around, trying to find a cup for her to frown when there was only Sabito's. "Use mine," he muttered out after some time, and Yin nodded her head a little as she grabbed a hold of his cup and poured some orange juice into the cup, taking a sip of it as she looked towards the time. She then looked towards Sabito and eyed him from top to bottom. "Not bad," she muttered out, and Sabito had an irk mark on his forehead, unable to understand what Yin meant by "not bad" when she looked to him from head to toe. "Hey, what does that mean?" he muttered out, and watched as Yin shrugged her shoulders in response as she proceeded to walk towards the living room and sat down on the sofa, sipping on the orange juice still as she looked through her phone. "You know, if you can't handle alcohol, you should stay away from it. It was tough ensuring that each of you was laying down properly and not hurting any parts of yourself." Yin spoke out, and Sabito raised an eyebrow in response. "Ah," says the one who fell asleep on the dining table. "Worried much, aren't you?" he asked in a teasing tone, and Yin rolled her eyes in response as she let out a soft yawn, then shook a little towards the balcony. She slowly walked up towards it, pushing open the curtains aside, only for her to pull it shut as her face flushed red. She swallowed a lump in her throat as she looked at Sabito, and he burst out laughing. "Exactly why I don't open the curtains," he spoke out, and Yin pinched the bridge of her nose as she let out a sigh. "It's early in the morning, in broad daylight. And people don't know how to shut their blinds," she muttered out, and Sabito chuckled once more as he looked towards the time and then towards his phone that was by the side of the sofa. "Hey," he called out, and Yin turned to look at him, and she noticed how he was holding out his phone. Yin raised an eyebrow in response at his gesture, and he let out a sigh. "Since we are roommates, we should exchange contacts in case one of us gets locked out of the apartment," he spoke out, and Yin let out a sigh then as she walked over and grabbed a hold of his phone in her delicate hands and started to key in her number. "The one who will end up stuck outside the apartment will be you," she spoke out, and Sabito could only smile despite how irked he was with the way that Yin was discussing to him in such a manner. Yeah, whatever you say," he muttered out, and looked as Yin walked towards into the kitchen to rinse the cup. He then watched she walked back into her room, only for her to come out with her laptop as well as her bag that, I guess, whatever she brings to school. "Are you heading off?" he spoke out, and Yin mumbled in response as she proceeded to put on her shoes. Sabito then stood up and stood at the small way where the front of the door was and watched as Yin easily slipped on her shoes. How her long black skinny jeans hugged her curves perfectly, and how she was wearing just a simple black tank top underneath as well. And he frowned. "You are just going to wear that?" he asked, and Yin nodded her head in response. "The weather forecast says it's going to be blazing hot out today. I don't want you to die from a heat stroke." Yin spoke out as she soon turned to open the door and left. Whereas Sabito could only let out a sigh then as he watched the front door closing. His eyes wandered towards where the bag of sandwiches laid, and he could only let out yet another sigh as he rubbed the back of his neck harshly. "Ugh, this woman," he muttered out as he headed back into his room to rummage through his wardrobe and eventually pulled out something from it. He then rubbed the back of his neck as he ran out of the unit, only to notice the empty hallway. She had disappeared so quickly. And Yin was soon even seen walking through the hallways of the academy, and she eventually found her class. She looked around the lecture hall, and her eyes laid upon the corner that she had always seemed to appreciate. Walking over there with ease as she settled down. "I can't believe there is such a beautiful girl in this major," one of the students called out as they looked towards Yin, who had taken her seat right towards the corner of the room, as she was scrolling through her phone. With a hand pressed against her stomach, as she could feel her now answeric was acting up. She slowly let out a sigh, then her head slid off of her hand and she ended up banging her forehead against the table. Once she had placed her phone towards the side as she felt she had scrolled on off, only for her classmates to panic as they didn't know what to do. Everyone was new around one another, given how it was the first day of school for a graphic design major. But Yin only let out another sigh as she heard her phone vibrate and frowned when she picked it up. Her eyes widened as she looked at who had texted her. She could only let out a soft sigh escape her lips as she chose to ignore the text. From Sabito, where he was asking where she was and what time was her lunch break. She felt she didn't need to reply, given how they were just roommates, not friends, just acquaintances. She slowly shook her head as she heard whispers and mumbles around the room, and she could hear someone panting. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked towards where the panting noise was coming from, to see Sabito was looking right at her next to her seat in the lecture hall, and she could only have her lips pressed into a fine line. Do you not know how to read? He snapped, and Yin remained silent as he slammed down the bag of sandwiches onto her table, and soon Yin noticed how he had flung a denim jacket over his petite frame. Damn it, woman. Lecture hall's cold too, and you haven't eaten anything since last night. Don't end up fainting at the apartment when I'm not around, he muttered out, and Yin's eyes widened as she looked at Sabito, who was blushing slightly, and he turned to take off. Wasn't that Sabito from the sports major? I heard he's popular with the girls in the academy. Someone spoke out from the lecture hall, and Yin continued to look at the bag of sandwiches that Sabito had slammed under the table. She let out a sigh as she shook her head in response. Picking up the bag of sandwiches, she slowly opened it and started to munch on the sandwich, given how she was hungry. She then looked at and noticed how everyone was looking at her. I think they're roommates since he mentioned apartment. Another student spoke out. What? Lucky? Another whined out, and Yin could only remain silent then as she continued to eat. And soon the lesson began. And Yin was thankful that Sabito had given her that denim jacket as the lecture hall started to feel a little bit more chilly than she was expected. And she could only have a soft, gentle smile on her face as she listened to her lecture. Hey, Yin, right? And Yin turned to look and notice one of her new classmates had come up to her. She slowly looked up at him with her eyes. I and a couple of friends are going to grab a bite before we head back to the hall. Want to join? He asked, and Yin smiled softly as she shook her head a little in response. Not today. It's been quite a tiring day since it's the first day of lessons. Yin spoke out, and the classmate nodded his head in response, only for her to stop. She turned to look at him. What's your name? I didn't pay attention during the introduction session. Yin spoke out, and he blinked his blue eyes a few times. Oh, Hajijin and Kyoki. You are here? And you turned to notice Kyoki, who was standing at the entrance of the lecture hall, which was behind, and Yin smiled softly as she looked at Kyoki. This is Kyoki, my girlfriend, he said with a proud smile, and Yin noticed how the girl was blushing madly in response. Well, nice to meet you, Hakujin, Koki. I'm Yin, and I'll be taking my leave now. She spoke out as she turned to leave, only for Hakuji calling her out. Hey, I heard you're rooming with Sabito, he spoke out, and Yin let out a sigh. Then she rubbed the back of her neck and looked towards him. I'm friends with him, and I sure do recognize that denim jacket. He spoke out, and Yin could only make a soft smile from her lips as she playfully brought a finger up and placed it against her lips. Keep it a secret, Hakuji. And Hakuji chuckled. Then, as Kyokumi could only giggle. See you around, Yin. I'm from the, I'm going to butcher this name, Human Nutrients major. Kyoki spoke out, and Yin turned to wave towards Kyoki before she took her leave. And Kyoki turned to look at Hajuji. She has a nice vibe. She could hear her whisper. Hakuji hummed in response. Just hope Sabito doesn't get annoyed by her too much. He spoke out, and soon grabbed a hold of her hand as his and intertwined fingers together. Yin yawned as she rubbed the back of her neck a little then, feeling exhausted given how she didn't have a proper food nor sleep as well. She could only let out a sigh as she walked down the stairs and stopped when she heard running footsteps. It is true! A girl with maroon hair is here. She's a beauty. I'm going to ask her to marry me. And Yin flinched as she was wrapped in the corner on either side as she looked at a pair of brown eyes. Her eyes parted as the boy was pulled away. What do you think you're doing to her? And Yin slowly recognized that voice as she looked as Tengen was holding a boy with yellow hair. Yin was pale, slightly as Tengen chuckled with a flushed smile. Izui Tengen, Sabito's friend. I'm glad to see you around the academy, too. He spoke out, and Yin could only nod her head a little in response as she turned to take her leave. She was feeling slightly lightheaded, and she could only wish to return to the apartment quickly. Yin then sighed as she eventually started to walk towards the hall, not hearing the running footsteps of her other students from the academia were rushing to head back to theirs. Yin could only slowly make her way to enter the building once again. Her eyes scanned the lift buttons as she pressed the floor she lived on. She let out a sigh as she leaned against the walls of the lift and tried to calm her breathing. Her blood sugar was low. She knew it. She heard the sound of the lift reaching the floor. She got off with ease as she walked towards the apartment and stayed with Sabito. Today had to have been a hectic day for her. Even though it was the first day of school, she fished through her pockets trying to find her key and eventually managed to bring it out despite how much her hand was shaking. She let out a sigh as she was about to insert the key, only to have another key be inserted into the keyhole. And she felt a hand on her waist. Be careful. Your blood sugar's low. I have noticed it ever since you woke up. Sabito's voice was heard, and Yin remained silent as he opened the door and slowly guided her into the apartment. He shut the door behind them as he ushered Yin towards the living room. This is why you shouldn't be skipping meals. You will end up becoming this weak. You should understand your body more than I do. Sabito spoke out, and Yin lied on the sofa as Sabito was busy in the kitchen preparing something for her. She muttered out, and Sabito raised an eyebrow. What's so funny? He asked and watched as Yin lifted her arm to cover her eyes. You are interesting, she spoke out, which caused Sabito to chuckle confusedly. Want to know more about me, then? Hey guys, I want to apologize for yesterday. I don't know why, but I was having technical difficulties, but it should be fixed now. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Love you. Mwah.